The cold wind howled across the rocky surface of the moon. Dust swirled in the air like ghosts dancing in the darkness. The sky above was black, lit only by distant stars and the glow of a dying gas giant that hung heavy on the horizon. Riva lay motionless among the twisted remains of her ship. The metal was bent and torn. Flames had long gone out, leaving behind smoke and silence. Her body was broken. One leg was crushed beneath debris, and her side burned with pain. Her breathing was slow, uneven. She was an alien, tall, with deep blue skin and silver eyes. Her people called themselves the Velari. They were proud, strong, and cold. Weakness was not accepted in their world. Riva had learned that too late. Her ship had been hit during a scouting mission. When she woke up, after the crash, she found that her crew had already gone. No signals, no rescue. They had left her behind, deciding she would not survive. That was the way of her people. If you slow down the group, you are no longer part of it. She had tried to stay alive. She built a fire. She dragged herself under shelter. She even activated a small distress beacon with the last of her ship's power. But now, after 3 days, she could feel her body giving up. The beacon had gone dark. Her water supply was empty. Her energy was gone. Riva looked up at the dark sky. There was no help coming. No one would care. Her people did not believe in saving the weak. She closed her eyes, ready for the end. But the wind didn't stop. Instead, it carried a strange sound. A beep. Then a crunch. Footsteps. Her eyes fluttered open for a second, but everything was blurry. The cold made it hard to think. Was it another Velari? Had someone come back? No. She saw a shadow, tall, broad, moving fast across the rocky ground. It stopped beside her. A hand reached out, brushing the dust from her face. It was warm, then she blacked out. Time passed. She wasn't sure how long. But suddenly, Riva felt heat against her skin. Real heat, not the bitter cold of the moon. Something soft wrapped around her shoulders. A blanket? She opened her eyes. A face looked down at her. Not Velari. Not one of her own kind. Human. His skin was pale from the cold, his eyes sharp and kind. His hair was messy under a worn cap. He held her gently, careful not to hurt her more. "You're alive," he said softly, almost surprised. "Hang on. I've got you." She didn't understand his words, but his voice was calm like a fire crackling in the night. He lifted her slowly, carefully placing her into something warm and soft. A rescue bag, some kind of human tool maybe. She wanted to speak but only coughed. He didn't panic. He placed something to her lips, a water pouch, and let her drink a few drops. Riva's body shook, not from fear, but from relief. Someone had come. Someone who wasn't from her world. Someone who had no reason to help her, and yet he was here. He looked down at her again. "You're going to be okay, I promise." She didn't know the words, but she saw the truth in his eyes. As the stars blinked above them, Riva's heart beat slower, but steadier. For the first time in days, she felt safe. She had closed her eyes to die, but when she opened them, a human was holding her. The cave was small, hidden under a rock wall that curved like a half-moon. Cold wind howled outside, but inside the cave, it was quiet. A small fire crackled in the center, its soft light dancing on the walls. Riva lay on a blanket near the fire. Her eyes blinked open slowly. The pain was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer sharp and wild. It was dull now, steady, something she could bear. She moved her head slightly and saw him again. The human. He was sitting a few steps away, fixing a piece of metal equipment. His hands were rough and covered in dust. His jacket was torn at the shoulder. His face looked tired but focused. Riva watched him for a moment. His movements were quick but careful. Every now and then, he glanced at her, making sure she was okay. He noticed her staring and gave a small smile. "Hey, you're awake." She didn't understand his words, but his voice was warm. He didn't sound like her people, who always spoke like they were giving orders. His tone was calm, gentle. Riva tried to sit up but winced in pain. The human rushed to her side. "Easy," he said, helping her lean back. "Your leg's still bad. Don't move too much." He pulled out a small tablet-like device. It blinked softly as he tapped on it. He pointed to it, then to himself. "Tom," he said. Riva blinked. Was that his name? He pointed to her. She stayed silent for a moment, then whispered, "Riva." "Riva," he repeated slowly. "Nice to meet you." She didn't know the words, but the way he said her name made her chest feel lighter. He opened a small pack and pulled out something soft. Food. It was a flat, dry-looking bar. He broke a piece and handed it to her. She hesitated. Her people didn't eat food from others. It was seen as a sign of weakness. But she was hungry. So hungry. Her hand trembled as she took the piece and placed it in her mouth. It was dry, but sweet. Energy flowed back into her body with every bite. Tom gave a nod of approval, then leaned back against the cave wall. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. A storm was coming. Riva looked toward the cave entrance. The clouds were thick, red and black. Lightning flashed across the sky like giant claws. Tom followed her gaze. "Yeah, nasty one out there. Lucky I found this cave." He spoke like he was talking to himself now. He wasn't expecting answers from her, but he still talked. It was strange to her, but not unpleasant. She didn't understand everything he said, but she understood this. He had saved her. He had carried her here. He had given her food, water, and warmth, and he didn't ask for anything in return. Why? Her people would never do this. They believed in strength. If someone fell behind, they were left. If someone was wounded, they were forgotten. But this human, Tom, he didn't leave her. He stayed. He helped. Riva studied his face again. There was no fear in his eyes, no anger, just calm. She pointed at the small fire and tilted her head, asking with her eyes, "Why?" He seemed to understand. Tom shrugged and said, "Didn't feel right to leave you." That made no sense to her, yet it made all the sense in the world. The storm outside grew louder. Wind screamed through the cracks. But inside the fire burned bright, and the human stayed close. For the first time in her life, Riva felt something strange, something her people never spoke of. She felt safe with a stranger from another world. The storm outside raged on through the night. The howling winds shook the cave, rattling the rocks above them. But inside, the small fire crackled, its warm glow dancing over the walls. Riva lay on the blanket, her eyes drifting from the fire to Tom, who sat cross-legged nearby. He had been working quietly on something all evening, pulling out small pieces of metal from his bag and using tools she had never seen before. She couldn't understand what he was doing, but his movements were steady, focused. Every now and then he would glance up at her to make sure she was comfortable. She tried to sit up again, slowly this time. The pain in her leg had dulled, but she could still feel the weight of it. She looked down at her leg, wrapped in torn fabric to hold the bone together. Her chest tightened. The crash had been brutal. Her body was weak. Tom noticed her struggling and quickly stood. He walked over and gently placed a hand on her shoulder to steady her. "Take it easy," he said, his voice low. Riva's gaze flickered to his face. She couldn't understand the words completely, but the tone was clear. He was worried about her. She took a deep breath and nodded, settling back into the blanket. She hadn't realized how much she had missed simple care, how much she longed for someone to show concern for her. The Valari never did. Tom sat back down, but this time he seemed to hesitate. He looked at the fire, then back at her, like he was deciding whether to speak. "Before the storm came," he said finally, "I saw your ship. I didn't know who you were, but I saw the damage. I thought I could help." Riva listened carefully. His words were slow, simple, but there was something in his voice, a kind of sadness or maybe regret. He wasn't just a stranger. He was someone who saw her, not just as an alien, but as a living being. She tilted her head slightly, looking at him. He was still working on his tools, but he hadn't stopped talking. "People don't always help," he continued, "not because they don't care. Sometimes it's because they think it's too late. They think someone else will help, or that it's not worth it." Riva felt a strange ache in her chest. The words made her think of her people, the Valari, who never looked back, who believed weakness was something to be discarded. The ones who had left her, abandoned her, but Tom didn't believe that. He hadn't left her. He had helped her. A human from a distant world had saved her. She didn't know why. She didn't know what made him different from everyone else. But she wanted to understand. She wanted to know what kind of being could offer kindness without expecting anything in return. Tom set down his tools and finally met her gaze. His expression softened. "I know you're probably wondering why I'm doing this. You're probably thinking there's some hidden reason, right? Maybe I want something. Or maybe I just want to get something out of it." Riva's heart skipped a beat. Yes, that's what she had been wondering. She couldn't help it. It seemed impossible that anyone would help her for no reason. Tom smiled slightly. "But that's not it. You're not some thing to fix or some problem to solve. You're just someone who needs help. That's enough for me." Riva stared at him, her mind spinning. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever seen her that way. For the first time, Riva felt the strange, confusing feeling of hope creeping into her heart. She had closed her eyes to die, certain that no one would care. Yet now a human had found her, cared for her, and treated her like an equal. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. Tom's smile widened, though it was faint. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than words ever could. Outside, the storm continued to roar, but inside the cave, Riva felt something new. Warmth. Not just from the fire, but from the unexpected kindness of a stranger. As the night passed, Riva's mind began to clear. She realized that she wasn't alone anymore. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know what the future held for her, for the Valari, or for Tom. But for now, in this quiet cave, she had one truth to hold on to. Not all humans were like the Valari. And for the first time, Riva began to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for someone like her after all. The fire in the cave had burned low, its warmth turning to a soft glow. The storm outside still raged, but the cave felt like a small world of its own, calm and quiet. Riva had slept for hours, her body slowly recovering from the pain. Tom sat near the fire, his head resting against the cave wall, eyes closed as he took a short rest. Riva lay on the blanket, her thoughts swirling. She had been with Tom for a while now, but there was one thing that still held her back. Language. She didn't know how to speak to him. The words he spoke were strange, not like anything she had ever heard from her people. She wanted to understand him, to share her own thoughts, but she didn't know how. She watched Tom as he worked on his equipment. His hands moved skillfully, but his eyes kept flicking to her, making sure she was all right. He wasn't in a hurry. He was patient, always checking on her, offering her food, water and comfort whenever she needed it. But there was still a barrier between them, a barrier that could only be crossed with words. She sat up slowly, her legs aching but manageable. Tom didn't notice at first, so she cleared her throat softly. He looked up immediately. "You okay, Reva?" Nodded but didn't say anything. She stared at the ground for a moment, gathering her thoughts. The human words she had heard felt like pieces of a puzzle, each one unfamiliar and strange. But she could still sense the meaning behind them. She knew Tom was trying to help. She just didn't know how to tell him she wanted to understand. Tom watched her closely, noticing the way her eyes flickered with frustration. He slowly set down the tools in his hands and moved closer to her, sitting down on the ground with her. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at her quietly. Reva hesitated for a long moment, then pointed at him, then at herself, then motioned to the air between them. Tom blinked, clearly unsure what she was asking. "You want to talk?" Reva nodded, her eyes focused on his face. She raised her hand and pointed to her chest, trying to show that she wanted to understand. She tapped her head, indicating her mind. "Words," she whispered softly, the sound foreign on her tongue. Tom smiled, understanding her silent plea. "All right," he said gently. "We'll figure it out." He stood up and walked over to his bag, pulling out a small device. It looked like a tablet, but much smaller than the one he had used before. He placed it in front of her. "This," he said, tapping the screen, "is a translator. It'll help you understand me. And it'll help me understand you." Reva stared at the device, both excited and nervous. She had never seen anything like it. She reached out hesitantly and took it in her hands. It was warm, and the surface felt smooth. She held it close, waiting. "Try it," Tom said. He sat down beside her again, looking at her with patient eyes. Reva tapped the screen as he showed her. It lit up, the words written in a language she didn't recognize. Then it changed. The words appeared again, but now in her own language. "Velari." Her heart skipped. The words were clear. The meaning was simple. She could read them. "Hello," the screen read. "How are you feeling?" She smiled. She could understand. She looked at Tom, her eyes wide with wonder. "I'm okay," she said slowly, unsure of the words. They felt strange in her mouth, like they didn't belong. But they were there, and they were real. She had spoken. Tom's face lit up with a bright smile. "Good, you're doing great," she nodded, still amazed. The machine had translated her thoughts. She could speak to him, at least in some way. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The translator didn't just help with words, it helped with understanding. Reva could feel it. She could feel the distance between them shrinking bit by bit as each word passed between them. The barrier that had kept them apart, that had made her feel like a stranger in her own body, was starting to crumble. She pointed at the translator again, then to herself. "Reva." Tom smiled, tapping the screen. "Tom." She repeated his name, her voice shaky but stronger than before. "Tom." "Reva," he said with a grin, matching her voice perfectly. And in that moment, with a simple exchange of names, something shifted inside Reva. It wasn't just words that connected them now. It was something deeper, something more. They weren't strangers anymore. They were two beings, sitting in a cave, in the middle of a storm. And for the first time, since the crash, Reva felt like she wasn't alone. The next morning, the cave was silent except for the soft rustling of leaves carried by the wind. Reva woke early, feeling more rested than she had in days. Her body still ached, but the pain was bearable now, and her mind was clear. She had Spent so long fighting for survival, but now, with Tom beside her, she felt as though she had a new purpose. Tom had already packed his things by the time she stirred. He was moving quickly, but not too quickly. He was taking his time, checking everything, making sure they were prepared. He wasn't rushing. The thought comforted Riva. She stood slowly, testing her injured leg. It still hurt, but the pain wasn't as sharp. The wound had healed enough for her to walk with some support. She didn't want to slow him down, but she didn't want to stay behind either. "Ready?" Tom asked, noticing her standing. His eyes were bright, but there was a hint of concern in them as he looked at her leg. Riva nodded. She wanted to say more, to thank him, but the words weren't there yet. Instead, she smiled, a small but genuine smile. That, she hoped, would say enough. Tom gave a nod in return. "Let's go then." They left the cave behind, stepping into the early morning light. The air was crisp, fresh, and the sky was a deep, clear blue. The path ahead was rough, with rocks and broken ground scattered across the landscape. The crash site wasn't far, but it felt like a long journey. Riva felt a mix of emotions, hope, fear, excitement. But she didn't let herself dwell on them. One step at a time. As they walked, Tom spoke to her, telling her about his life before they had met. He explained the world he came from, the people he had left behind, and the journey he had been on before stumbling upon her ship. "I was part of a group," he said, walking beside her. "We were exploring different planets, looking for, I don't know, something, maybe answers, but things didn't go as planned. My crew, they didn't make it. I was the only one left." Riva looked at him, her heart aching with empathy. She knew what it was like to lose everything. The Valari, her people, had cast her aside. And now Tom, too, had lost everything. His people, his crew. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered, not needing the translator to communicate that. She hoped it was enough to let him know she understood. Tom's lips quirked into a soft smile. "Yeah, I guess not." They continued, walking, the miles passing slowly but steadily. The landscape around them seemed to change the further they went. The jagged rocks gave way to rolling hills, and small, unfamiliar plants began to grow along the path. Eventually, the wreckage of Riva's ship came into view. It looked even more broken now, the metal twisted and torn by the crash. Tom stopped and looked at it, his expression unreadable for a moment. He had seen many wrecks in his time, but something about this one felt different. "This your ship?" he asked, turning to Riva. She nodded, her eyes locked on the wreckage. "Yes." Tom stepped closer to the wreck, scanning it carefully. "It's a mess," he said, more to himself than to her. "But it can be fixed, maybe." Riva felt a strange mix of emotions. She had once seen her ship as a symbol of failure. It had crashed, and with it, all her hopes of returning to the Valari. But now, with Tom beside her, she wasn't sure if she wanted to go back. She wasn't sure where she belonged anymore. "Do you want to try and fix it?" Tom asked, turning back to her. Riva shook her head. "I don't know. I don't think I can go back to where I came from." She paused. "Maybe it's time to move forward." Tom gave her a knowing look, his expression soft. "I think that's a good idea." They spent the next few hours searching through the wreckage, looking for anything that could be useful. There were scraps of metal, broken wires, and parts of the ship's engine that might still be salvageable. Tom was able to find some tools in his pack, and together they worked on gathering what they could. As the sun began to set, they stood back and looked at their work. They hadn't fixed much, but they had gathered supplies. And more importantly, they had spent time together, building something, not from the wreckage, but from trust. The stars were beginning to appear again, and the air had grown cooler. Riva felt the weight of the day settle on her, but she also felt a sense of peace. She had come so far, From the crash to the cave, from the stranger who saved her to the companion she had come to trust. And now, as the night stretched out before them, she knew that whatever came next, whether they fixed the ship or continued on without it, she wouldn't be alone. The days had passed quickly since they had left the wreckage behind. Riva and Tom continued their journey, moving farther from the crash site with each step. The landscape had changed once again, this time to a wide valley filled with soft grass and small, colorful flowers. It felt peaceful, almost too peaceful after everything they had been through. Riva walked beside Tom, her leg feeling stronger with each passing day. She had started to walk more steadily now, though she still relied on Tom's support whenever the terrain grew too rough. They had become a team, helping each other in ways that were simple yet important. As they walked through the valley, Tom pointed out the different plants and animals they passed by, explaining how his people had studied them when they first arrived on this planet. Riva listened carefully, her mind eager to learn. She had never known such things existed. Her world was nothing like this one. There were no flowers, no peaceful valleys, only harsh environments and cold cities. Tom looked over at her. "I can't imagine what it must have been like coming from a place like that," he said quietly. "Everything's so different for you now." Riva hesitated. "I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. My people, they cast me out. I don't know where I belong anymore." Tom stopped and turned to face her. "Maybe it's not about where you belong," he said gently. "Maybe it's about who you want to be." His words hit her harder than she expected. She had spent so long thinking about what had happened to her, about what had been taken from her. But Tom was right. Perhaps it was time to stop looking backward and start looking forward. Riva looked up at the sky, the sun low on the horizon. The colors of the sunset painted the clouds in shades of orange and pink. She had never seen anything like it before. Her world had always been gray, cold. This was something new. "I think I want to learn," she said slowly, turning to Tom. "I want to learn about this world, about your people. I want to understand. I don't want to just survive anymore. I want to live." Tom's face softened, and he gave her a warm smile. "You're doing that already. Every day you're living more, and I'll be here to help you, Riva. You're not alone in this." The words gave her strength more than she realized. It wasn't just about fixing her leg or surviving the crash. It was about moving forward, building something new. She didn't know where this journey would lead, but with Tom by her side, it didn't seem so scary anymore. The next few days were spent exploring their surroundings. Tom had found a small stream nearby, and they spent time gathering water, learning how to make simple traps for food, and finding shelter for the nights. Riva was surprised by how much she enjoyed it. The tasks felt purposeful, each one bringing her closer to a world she had never imagined. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Tom began to tell her stories of his home planet. He spoke of the cities, the oceans, and the different creatures his people had encountered. He described the vastness of the sky and the way the stars looked from his world. Riva listened in awe. She had never known such a world existed. "What was it like?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Back home?" Tom looked thoughtful, staring into the fire. "It was complicated," he said after a long pause. "There were good things, but also a lot of bad things, a lot of mistakes. That's why I left." Riva nodded, understanding more than he realized. She too had left her home, not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. The Valari had cast her aside, and she had been forced to move on. But now, with Tom, she felt like she had a chance to create something better. She wasn't running anymore. She was choosing a new path, one that could lead to hope. "Do you ever miss it?" Riva asked softly. Tom looked at her, his eyes softening. Sometimes, but I think that's normal. You miss the things you can't change, the things that are part of who you are. But that doesn't mean you can't build something new. We don't have to keep looking back. Riva considered his words. He was right, of course. There was nothing left for her to return to. The Valari had made sure of that. But maybe that wasn't so bad. Maybe, in a strange way, it was freeing. As the fire crackled, they both sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The night was peaceful, and for the first time in a long time, Riva felt truly at peace. There were no more thoughts of being abandoned or lost. The future, whatever it held, was hers to choose. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring or the day after. But for now, with the stars shining above and Tom by her side, she knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. Days passed in the cave, and the storm outside eventually died down. The wind slowed, and the sky above cleared, revealing a dark blue expanse of stars. The moon still hung high, casting soft shadows on the rocky landscape. It was quiet again, except for the crackling of the small fire inside the cave. Riva and Tom had settled into a strange but comfortable routine. Every day he would check her leg, tending to the wound and making sure it was healing properly. He showed her more of his strange human tools, and little by little she began to understand how they worked. The translator helped them communicate more easily now, though there were still moments when they had to rely on gestures and expressions to fill in the gaps. But as the days passed, Riva began to notice something more than the physical care he gave her. Tom's presence had become a kind of calm. It wasn't just the way he fixed her leg or fed her when she was hungry. It was the way he looked at her. The patience in his eyes, the quiet strength in his voice. She wasn't used to that. Her people, the Valari, didn't show weakness. They didn't show vulnerability. But Tom didn't hide his care for her. He wasn't afraid to help her. He wasn't afraid to be kind. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the shadows grew long, Riva sat by the fire, watching him work on his equipment again. The cave was warm now, the fire crackling with a pleasant sound. Her leg no longer ached as badly. She could almost walk on it, though not quite yet. Still, she felt stronger. Tom noticed her staring and smiled. "You look better," he said. Riva nodded, grateful for the attention. She pointed at the sky outside, then at him, then back at herself. She wasn't sure how to ask, but she was curious. What happens next, she thought. What comes after all this? Tom seemed to understand her question even without words. He stood up and walked toward the entrance of the cave. "We'll leave soon," he said, looking out into the distance. "I've got a ship not far from here. It's not much, but it can get us somewhere safe." Riva's heart skipped at the thought of leaving. She had never thought about the future before. She had never thought about what happened after her ship had crashed. She had been ready to die, to fade into nothingness. But now she had a choice. She followed Tom to the cave entrance, the cool air brushing against her skin. She looked out over the rocky landscape, the broken remains of her ship still visible in the distance, but fading under the soft light of the setting sun. She realized with a quiet shock that she didn't feel lost anymore. She wasn't the abandoned one anymore. Tom had found her, and now they were leaving together. But where would they go? She didn't know. She didn't know what her future held or where she would fit in. The Valari had their ways, their rules, but Tom wasn't from her world. He didn't follow those rules. He didn't follow anything but his own sense of right and wrong. The uncertainty made her nervous. She had always known where she belonged before, among her people, among the Valari. Now, she was stepping into a world she didn't understand, one that Tom knew but she didn't. Tom turned to her, his face serious. I don't know what the future holds for either of us, Reva, but I do know this. You're not alone anymore. I won't leave you. Not now. Reva's heart swelled. She didn't know how to express what she was feeling, but she didn't need to. His words, his actions, spoke everything she needed to hear. He wasn't just saving her from the crash or from her broken body. He was saving her from the loneliness she had carried for so long. She took a step closer to him, her hand resting on her chest. Not alone, she whispered. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best she could do. She hoped he understood. Tom's smile was soft, warm. He nodded. Not alone. Together they turned away from the cave and started walking toward the wreckage of her ship. The path ahead was uncertain, but it didn't matter. They would face it together. As the sun set behind them, Reva felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. A new beginning, one she hadn't expected, one she hadn't even dared to imagine. But now, with Tom by her side, she could. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. The sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley. Reva and Tom crouched silently behind the cluster of rocks, their breath held in quiet anticipation. The strange beings continued to move around, their armor reflecting the fading light as they worked on their mysterious device. The air was thick with tension, each moment dragging on longer than the last. Reva could feel her pulse racing, her thoughts scattered. What did they want? Why had they come? And most importantly, would they discover her and Tom hiding here? The strange beings continued their task, seemingly unaware of the humans just a few yards away. Their voices were muffled behind their helmets, their language incomprehensible. Reva strained to hear, hoping for some clue as to their intentions. But the only thing she could make out was the steady hum of their equipment, the sound of technology far beyond anything she had ever seen. Tom stayed close beside her, his hand resting lightly on her arm. He seemed calm, but Reva could sense the tension in his body. He was watching, waiting, always alert. Despite the danger, he exuded a quiet confidence that gave her strength. She realized, with a quiet shock, that she had come to trust him completely. "Do you think they'll leave soon?" Reva whispered, her voice barely audible. Tom shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving the figures ahead. "I'm not sure, but we can't stay here forever." Reva nodded. She knew they had to make a decision, soon. If they stayed, they risked being discovered. If they moved, they risked walking right into whatever plan these beings had. But staying hidden wasn't an option for long. After what seemed like an eternity, one of the figures turned and started moving in their direction. Reva's breath caught in her throat. The figure's helmet glowed faintly, and it was heading straight for them. Tom shifted his weight, his fingers tightening around her arm. "We have to go. Now." Without a word, they sprang to their feet and moved quickly, as quietly as they could, toward a small ridge on the other side of the valley. The rocks provided some cover, but they would have to move quickly and carefully. Every step felt like it echoed in the still air. The figure paused, its glowing eyes scanning the area as it reached the spot where Reva and Tom had been moments before. Reva could feel the tension in her chest, her legs aching as she pushed herself to move faster. Suddenly, the figure turned and raised its arm, activating some kind of device. There was a sharp, whirring noise, followed by a flash of light. Reva's heart stopped. Were they caught? But just as quickly as it started, the light disappeared. The figure lowered its arm, its attention shifting back to the others. The moment of danger passed. Reva felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she knew they couldn't afford to stay complacent. They reached the ridge, panting from the exertion. The figures were still distracted, but Reva knew it wouldn't be long before they started searching again. The thought of being discovered made her stomach churn. "What, now?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. Tom looked at her, his face serious. "We keep moving. We can't stay in one place for too long. We need to get out of their path." Reva nodded, though a part of her still felt a nagging fear. They were deep in unfamiliar territory, with no idea of what lay ahead. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of resolve. "We need to make a choice," she said, her voice steady. "Do we stay and fight, or do we run?" Tom looked at her, his eyes meeting hers. There was a long pause before he spoke. "I think we run," he said, "but not out of fear. We run because we still have a chance to live, to build something new. We don't have to face this alone. Not anymore." Reva felt the weight of his words. For so long she had carried the burden of survival alone, but now, with Tom by her side, she realized that the fight wasn't just about staying alive. It was about choosing what came next. It was about creating something, a future, even in the face of the unknown. She looked toward the distant horizon, her heart filling with a sense of hope. The path ahead wasn't clear, but it was theirs to choose. "Let's run," Reva said, her voice firm with determination. Together they turned and made their way down the ridge, moving swiftly and quietly through the shadows of the valley. Behind them, the strange figures continued their work, unaware of the humans who had slipped through their grasp. As Reva and Tom disappeared into the valley's depths, the stars above shimmered brightly. For the first time in what felt like forever, Reva knew she wasn't alone. Whatever came next, she would face it with Tom at her side, and whatever the future held, they would face it together. The days turned into weeks, and life in the valley grew more routine. Reva and Tom had found a steady rhythm, learning new things every day. They built a small shelter by the stream, where they gathered food, filtered water, and rested in the cool nights under the stars. For the first time in a long time, Reva began to feel like she was part of something. She was no longer just surviving. She was living. Tom continued to teach her about the planet, its animals, and the plants that could be used for food or medicine. Reva learned quickly, fascinated by the differences between her world and this one. In return, she shared stories of her own life, her people, and the advanced technologies her kind had developed. Though Tom didn't fully understand everything she told him, he listened with rapt attention. It felt good to speak of her past, even though it was a past she wasn't sure she wanted to return to. One day, as they were out collecting firewood, the peaceful calm of their days was shattered by a sudden sound. A low hum that grew louder, with each passing second. Reva froze, her eyes scanning the sky, her heart racing. Tom noticed her tense up and followed her gaze. High above them, a shape began to appear, descending toward the valley. It was a ship, large and sleek, unlike anything they had seen before. "It's coming closer," Tom said, his voice tight with concern. Reva's thoughts raced. She recognized the shape, the markings on the side. This was not a ship from her world. This was an alien vessel, one that didn't belong here. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be that the Valerie had finally come for her? Was this the rescue she had been waiting for, or was it something far worse? The ship touched down just beyond the trees, kicking up a cloud of dust as it settled on the ground. Reva's first instinct was to run, to hide. But something in Tom's expression stopped her. "It's okay," he said, his voice steady but low. "I don't think they're here for us. But we should be careful." Reva nodded, her mind still racing. She didn't want to take any chances. Tom had been kind to her, shown her a world she never thought she'd see. She didn't want anything to happen to him. They crouched low in the grass, watching as the ship's hatch slowly opened. Reva felt a knot tighten in her stomach. From the shadows of the ship emerged figures, tall, armored beings with strange glowing devices on their arms. They moved in unison, scanning the area, their eyes hidden behind dark helmets. "They're not from your world," Tom whispered, though Riva had already gathered that much. The beings didn't seem like the Valari or anyone she had known. The figures moved with purpose, setting up some kind of device on the ground. Riva's pulse quickened. What were they doing here? What did they want? Tom didn't speak, but Riva could see the caution in his posture. He was trying to assess the situation, trying to figure out if they were in danger. They remained motionless, hidden in the grass, watching as the strange beings worked. A few moments later, one of them turned, its helmet glowing faintly as it scanned the area. Riva's heart skipped again. Was it looking directly at them? Then, as if sensing something, the figure raised a hand to its ear and spoke in a language Riva couldn't understand. The others paused and turned toward the ship, exchanging words in low tones. Tom's face tightened. "They've found something. We need to go." Before Riva could respond, the figures turned away from the ship and began walking in their direction. Tom grabbed her arm, pulling her into the cover of the trees. They moved quickly, carefully, making sure they made no sound. The strange beings walked past them, too focused on their task to notice the two humans hiding nearby. Riva held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. They had to get away. But where could they go? The valley was vast, but it didn't offer much cover beyond the trees. Tom didn't stop, though. He kept moving, his grip on Riva firm but gentle. They made their way toward a cluster of rocks that would provide some shelter, hoping to stay hidden long enough for the strange visitors to leave. As they crouched behind the rocks, Riva's thoughts raced. Who were these beings? Why were they here? And most importantly, what did they want with them? For the first time in weeks, Riva felt a deep sense of unease. The safety she had found in this valley, the calm she had come to cherish, seemed so fragile now. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again.